Hey, Patreon, I have something to tell you. This is the fourth segment I've recorded today, including the last two episodes of the season on this bonus MxTRA. For those of you listening in the wild, it's patreon.com/musicisnotgenre. You get these bonuses same week as the main episode, and often I don't release them to the wild. So there are plenty of other bonuses that you may never hear or see unless you go to patreon.com/musicisnotgenre. But the thing I have to tell you, Patreon people, is it's hot in this room and I'm sweating and I've got sweat patches on my shirt, but also my camera has been just the teensiest bit off this entire time, and it's been rankling me, and I haven't fixed it. Tell me why I didn't just stop and fix it. I don't know. Tell me also what I'm talking about, which is this. The main episode this week was on the major music deaths in 2025 so far. So far being the time of recording, which was August 7th. I promised you that the bonus episode for this main episode was going to be about death clusters in history, music death clusters in history. All right. In the main episode, I debated whether or not clusters actually exist, which in my mind, no, I don't think they really do. But the fact that we see them that way just makes things more interesting and more significant to us. And again, calls attention to people whom we might not otherwise pay attention to. I had mentioned in that episode the example of Ozzy Osbourne, Chuck Mangione, and George Koymans of Golden Earring dying on the same day, I think July 22nd. You know, who would ever... I remember Chuck Mangione. Most people don't, younger at least. Everybody knows Ozzy, pretty much. Who knows George Koymans unless you remember the song Twilight Zone from them or know about Golden Earring. But the fact that they all died in the same day meant the press talked about them. It meant that maybe you will look up the music you don't know, you know. Again, I'll just iterate. Since I did it in the main episode, I won't go into it deeply. No evidence supports that there are clusters. In fact, if you take all the occurrences of one category, say music deaths, and extrapolate the data, you find it's basically happening all the time. Everything's happening all the time. That said, there have been plenty of periods in history when enough things happen in a short period that the year or era was considered more significant and or volatile. That's happened with historical events and everything else. And that's what this bonus MxTRA is about, the most significant music death clusters. Some of these clusters were in a single year or even on a single day, you'll find out, while others were spread over 2 or more years. But to me, they were still within enough of a time frame that they could be considered a cluster of more significant deaths in a shorter period than usual. So I'm going to start in the 1950s and go right up until this year. And I'm going to rank by the end. I'm going to mention all these chronologically, but then I'm going to rank them. I'm going to rank the death clusters. What a sentence. I will rank the death clusters, but that's what's going to happen. I'm going to start with to me, the least significant. Oh, they're all significant, but the least significant of these 8 or so, and up to the most significant. And I'm telling you right now, you may be surprised that the one I say is the most significant. So let's start in 1959. If you know anything about music history, you're probably at least somewhat aware of the day the music died, American Pie, blah, blah, and all that, which refers to February 3rd, 1959. The plane crash that killed Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. Ritchie Valens was 17. Buddy Holly was 22, and the Big Bopper was 28. They were doing a rock and roll package tour, which you think of as a thing, oh, people used to tour together and it was fun. It was good. People do that to this day. I mean, last year we saw, Green Day with Smashing Pumpkins with Linda Lindas and somebody else. The Hives, I think. Insane. Maybe they were for the Foo Fighters. I don't remember. All I remember is bands are constantly touring together all the time. It's a good way to keep the revenue up and get fans to crossbreed and stuff like that. It's been happening for decades and decades. In fact, my dad did this same tour the following year, I believe, 1960, I want to say, but you can ask him about that. But at any rate, that is a very famous death cluster. It's one incident, so it made its own cluster. And it's the first cluster in the modern era. Certainly not the first big music death. Of course not. Glenn Miller's plane crash in 1944 on December 15th was huge. But I couldn't find any significant music death clusters prior to 1959, so that's why we're starting there. It's the first one, chronologically. And then you have the era of 1969 to 71, and this is also a pretty famous one. As to me, I think as famous as the day the music died. Because you have, in those years, especially 1970, but again, 69, 71, you have Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison all dying at the age of 27. The last three within 6 months of each other. And that started the whole 27 Club thing, which is still a thing to this day. I did an episode on the 27 Club for Death is Dumb a couple years ago. Look it up. And it showed how this extended to people like Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse. There are way more people in the 27. I think Robert Johnson is in that too, than you would realize. So that's the second death cluster. The next one that pops up to me as having a larger than usual number of big music deaths is 1977. Elvis died that year. Lynyrd Skynyrd's plane crash happened that year. Mark Boland, T-Rex, died that year. Bing Crosby died in 77, as did Errol Garner, famous jazz musician. The first three alone would have made this a significant year, but those five together, I think 77 is a significant year. But then the next one you have to go with is 1980. And this, honestly, I forgot about this. I'm not talking in this bonus about significant music deaths, singular. You could talk about that. That's what Death is Dumb is about. My first episode was on John Lennon, right? Of Death is Dumb. I'm talking about clusters. I wouldn't have said 80 was a cluster because I forgot that not only did John Lennon, die or was killed in 1980, John Bonham died of Led Zepp, and Bon Scott, the original singer of AC/DC, died in 1980, as did Ian Curtis, killed himself from Joy Division. So 1980, a significant death cluster for music. Now, I'm not sure I would rank this. I'm going to put it on here, but because it's worth mentioning, and that is 1991. Saw the deaths of Freddie Mercury. That's the biggest one. I would have said that defined the year in terms of music deaths. But then Eric Carr also died on the same exact day. Johnny Thunders, couldn't believe he actually lived that long, died in 91, as did Stan Getz, Serge Gainsbourg. But to me, only Freddie Mercury really rises to that level of notoriety, so not quite a high ranking, but I think deserves a mention. And I think the next one that deserves a mention is 1994, but stretching it to 97, that kind of mid-90s. But let's just say 94, because that first year alone, you had Kurt Cobain, Kristen Pfaff of Hole, Fred Sonic Smith of the MC5, Harry Nilsson, Dinah Shore and Henry Mancini, Nicky Hopkins and Cab Calloway all died in 1994. And then following that, in the next couple of years, you had Shannon Hoon of Blind Melon. You had Selena, big tragic death. And then Tupac and Biggie, of course. So that to me is a pretty significant stretch there. For the 2000s, honestly, I wouldn't say, kind of like the 1980s, there wasn't really a cluster of deaths in music, more of a series of spread out tragedies. So George Harrison died in 2001. Lane Staley and Lisa Left Eye Lopes died in 2002. Michael Jackson died in 2009. Amy Winehouse in 2011. Whitney Houston and Adam Yauch in 2012. So, and I remember, I think almost all of these being giant shockers to me and to many, many people, but too spread out to be a cluster, which brings us to the last couple significant clusters. And that first one is 2015 through 2017. So let's just start. You ready? 2015, you had Lemmy from Motorhead, Lemmy Kilmister, Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots, 2015. Towards the end of the year, they died. But earlier, you had B.B. King and Benny King. You had Cilla Black and Leslie Gore. You had Alan Toussaint, famous, New Orleans musician. That was 2015. 2016, I don't need to tell you if you follow music news and have been a fan for a while, but let's do it. Prince, David Bowie, George Michael, Glenn Frey, Emerson and Lake from Emerson, Lake and Palmer, George Martin, Leonard Cohen, Maurice White of Earth, Wind and Fire, and Merle Haggard. And if that wasn't enough, in 2017, there was Chris Cornell of Soundgarden, Chester Bennington of Linkin Park, Tom Petty, which was the biggest probably one in 2017, Glenn Campbell, arguably also big. Fats Domino and Chuck Berry, Clyde Stubblefield, Charles Bradley, Mel Tillis, Greg Allman, Malcolm Young, also of AC/DC. Jay Giles died in 2017, as did Walter Becker of Steely Dan and David Cassidy. So even though 2017 had a longer list of big deaths, the peak of that wave of 2015 to 2017 was 2016. And then final cluster, I would argue, is this year. The main episode was on it, so I won't name everyone, but I will name Sly Stone, Brian Wilson, Roberta Flack, Ozzy Osbourne, Chuck Mangione, Angie Stone, Jill Solbuhl, Rick Derringer, Lalo Schifrin, Eddie Palmieri, David Johansen, Marianne Faithfull. I'm sure I missed Charles Strauss. Huge deaths to me, so already a giant year for music deaths. More than others. And I think those 8 are all of them. If I miss some in the 2000s especially, or the 80s, let me know. And I'm saying, did I miss an era or single year where a whole bunch of significant music people died? That's what I want to know from you. But before we get there, I'm going to rank them. Here's my take. The least significant of the 8, although again, they're all significant, is 1991, the year Freddie Mercury died. Again, there were significant people who died that year, but it didn't seem to really cluster out the way some of these others. The other would be 1994 to 97. Lots of people died tragically during that period, but it was spread out in a way that didn't make it a very strong cluster. So that's 7th on the list. 6th on the list is 1977, primarily because the main thing that year is Elvis died. So even though other people, Bing Crosby, Leonard Skinner, it really, Elvis overshadowed all of that, but deserves to be on the list at number 6. Number 5 is 1980. I would say that 77 and 80 are kind of tied, because in 80 it was John Lennon who pulled focus from Bon Scott and John Bonham, and it was Elvis who pulled focus in 77. But so you could interchange 6 and 5 here on this list, but I say they're right about where they need to be. Number 4 is this year. This may rise in the ranks if more people die before December 31st, and they will, and who knows who they will be. But right now, I think it deserves to be number 4, far more than any of the ones I have mentioned so far on this list, but not quite as significant as the ones that are coming. The third most significant music death cluster is the day the music died, 1959, what started it all. Big Bopper, Richie Valens, Buddy Holly. That has to be in the top 3. Some would call it number 1, and I respect that. I would not call it number 1, but I absolutely think top 3. Speaking of top 3, the second one, and this has to be top, 3 as well, is the 1969 to 71, the whole 27 Club era. And again, 3 and 2 you could probably interchange depending on your generation, but they were both equally significant in my mind, and the 2 people most refer to, usually historically when they talk about death clusters, would be 59 and 69 to 71 because of the 27 Club. But neither of those are number 1. Why? Because the number 1 music death cluster era, hands down, is 2015 to 2017. The sheer number of body blows of big people from many eras in music who died from 2015 to 17, as old as Chuck Berry, and as new as Chester Bennington, and all the people in between, is just it's disturbing. It was disturbing then, it's still disturbing. There are people, including me, who haven't gotten over some of those deaths, in particular Prince and Bowie, and some people feel the same way about Tom Petty. I think that ranks, and will for a very long time rank, as the worst music death cluster in history. But tell me what you think. I would like to know, hey, death is a great water cooler subject, or subject to, you're drinking at a bar, right? I don't know. I'm that kind of a person. I don't talk about it all the time, but when I do, I really get into it, which you can see from this bonus MXtra here on patreon.com/musicisnotgenre. You Patreon people who are seeing this week of, thank you for hanging with me, and all of you who are getting to view or listen to this as a bonus if I choose to share it into the wild. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would love to hear your comments. Thanks, and since this is the last bonus for the summer of Season 7, I won't talk to you next week. I will talk to you in a few weeks. Have a great summer.